I've worked at companies before where a team has just busted their ass for a year to get some key release out the door through all this drama and stress. And once it was out, all the management did was complain about why it wasn't done better. They didn't listen to any of the feedback. And so, if you're not getting valued, if you're not getting rewarded, if you're not getting any kind of recognition, that is a sign that it may be time to move on. Have you ever been faced with the all too common question, should you stay or should you go? Well, in the over 26 years I've worked in the software industry, I've had many different jobs. And today I'd like to share some of the things that I've learned about how to know if it's worth staying where you are, even though the situation may be difficult or not as desirable as you'd like, or if it really is time to move on. Here at Healthy Software Developer, I talk about 4 things: career progression, working healthy, finding meaning and purpose in your career, and escaping the corporate grind. This episode is specifically to help you with escaping the corporate grind. And you might be wondering, hey, if I'm going to escape the corporate grind, shouldn't I just not work a job for a company, period? Now, while that may be your end game, you may have heard, as I talked about in my episode on escaping the corporate grind, that was the title of it, that often the smartest move for you is to do this incrementally. So this episode today, even though it can both help you if you're thinking of quitting working for corporate jobs and going on your own, or you want to keep climbing the corporate ladder, find just better, more fulfilling work, this should be beneficial to you either way. So let's just get right into this. Here's 7 signs that it may be time to move on from your current tech job. And one thing I should mention before I even get into this is I'm going to be talking a lot about 4 certain aspects of everybody's career that really depend a lot on where you are in your life and how satisfied you are with your career. And if you have never heard me talk about this before, I actually have a free Healthy Software Development career guide. There's a link in the description. You can grab it. But if you watch this video today and you're having a little bit of a hard time making sense of some of these points that I mentioned, grab that career guide because it goes into more detail and it'll kind of clarify a little bit about what I'm about to talk about. So the first sign that it may be time for you to move on from your current gig is just stagnation and a lack of career advancement opportunities or professional growth. Now, in the tech industry, I think we put way too much emphasis on growth. All we seem to think about is growing, learning new skills, especially tech skills. But there's a time to grow and there's a time not to grow. I've shared in other episodes on the show that I had some really difficult periods in my life. This was about 6 to 8 years ago, where the last thing on my mind was whether I should grow or not. But if you're at a job and you've been there for a while, one of the things I would really encourage you to consider is your manager or the company may have told you, hey, we're putting you on this project. There's a bunch of growth opportunities for you. You're going to get to do this thing. But remember, they're always going to position that and they're always going to couch that in a growth benefit that's beneficial to the company. Now, I don't want to come across so jaded that I'm saying that a company can't offer you growth opportunities that are meaningful to you, but just be careful because the way the company may think they're offering you the opportunity to grow may not actually be growth that you want or that you need to move to the next step of your career. So if you're in a place where you're starting to feel like I haven't grown in a while, that's pretty obvious that that's at least one of these 7 signs I'm going to share that it may be time to move on. But even if they're offering you opportunities for growth, again, new technology, a promotion, things like that, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's what's right for you. You really want to take a step back and think, where am I headed? Is this somewhere where I'm growing that's actually going to help me with my next job and the jobs beyond? And the other thing is there an opportunity for career advancement? A lot of these really big tech companies, FANGs are notorious for this. And you may know my view on FANGs. I think they're some of the worst companies to work for. I'll explain in some other episodes, and I've talked about before why I think that's the case. But many of these big companies come up with levels. They have engineer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, senior engineer 1, 2, 3, staff engineer 1, 2. And so they give you this kind of illusion of career growth, and, they're giving you maybe salary bumps along the way, but translating that into, am I actually advancing in a way that whatever I'm doing or the amount I'm making as far as, in the general industry, should I leave this company with all these levels? That's often very difficult to figure out. So if you're at a company and you've been there like 2 to 5 years and you've never been promoted in some way, that can be, of course, your own fault because you're just not putting enough effort into it, or you're not being strategic enough about growing. But it can also be that the growth opportunities they're offering as far as career advancement aren't really opportunities. They're just a program the company came up with to keep you sort of along a ladder or just kind of along a walkway that you feel like you're moving along in your career, but it's really actually meant to stretch out your progression and keep you at the company for as long as possible. The second sign that it may be time to move on is misaligned goals or ethics with the company. Now, a very obvious example of this is if you're working at a company for a while and they start to ask you to do things that you feel really uncomfortable inside. You feel like they're wrong. You feel like the business practices, maybe how they're charging their customer, maybe how they're treating their development, maybe they're hiding the state of the quality of the product from their own customers. If you start to feel out of alignment with the ethics of the company, take that seriously because you have a long career. Hopefully you will have a long career and your reputation follows you. And if you support a company that's unethical, you may get paid. But if people see on your resume that you worked at that company, and let's say someday it comes out in the news publicly that this company was doing things that were unethical, you can unfortunately get associated with that company. I think a lot of people don't think about that. But the other thing is you can just kind of fall out of love or out of passion for the company. Now, that may sound funny because a lot of people look at jobs as I'm never in love with the job. But my point being, I coach a lot of people through career coaching on my website. And some of the people go get a job at a company they've always dreamed of working for. Maybe it's a gaming company. Maybe it's Microsoft. Maybe it's a car manufacturer. It could be anybody. But they may have joined that company not just to get a paycheck, but because they like what the company offers in the marketplace. And if you join a company and you've been there for a while and you feel like the impact that company is making in the world doesn't matter to you anymore, it's going to be all that much more difficult when you're sitting in, stand-up meetings or user requirement sessions or, all hands company meetings or, even if this is remote and you're supposed to kind of fake that you care about the purpose of the company and what they're doing when really it doesn't matter. The third sign that it may be time to move on from your current gig is if there's just a toxic work environment. I talk about this all the time. The first sign of a toxic work environment is just poor management. And an example of poor management is just first bad decisions. If you see your management, now again, I got to caveat this with you're not in their role. So you have to be a little bit careful that you aren't second guessing things with limited visibility. Because if you're an individual contributor, like, let's say a programmer, QA tester, even a product manager, you may not have full visibility into the entire strategy of the company. So there can be things going on that are actually going on for a good reason. Now, I personally think good management should be able to communicate that in a way that they help their employees understand why some direction maybe is unpopular or a little different than they think it is. But if there's a pattern of just poor decision making, cutting corners, choosing development practices that are not adequate for, let's say, the type of environment that you're working in. Let's say it's a company that's audited by the FDA and you're following a really roughshod development process where there's no documentation, or it's a startup and you're trying to follow, all these really rigid processes and it's not letting the company move forward. If you start to get to a point where you lose faith in your management because of their poor decisions, that can be a real problem. And also, if your management starts to micromanage you, most people have experienced this or know what this is. This is really when management's not giving you enough space to have some autonomy yourself and just get the work done. They're kind of hovering over you, whether virtually or in person, checking up on you constantly, questioning all your decisions, calculating and measuring all the effort and everything you do, basically not showing a lot of faith in your capabilities. Now, if you're new to the industry or you're new to a company, does it make sense that management may check up on you more often because you just haven't earned the trust of them? Yeah, I'm definitely not saying as soon as you join a company and somebody starts to question what you're doing, just quit the company. And I should also say, I'm not saying quit any company based on the presence of one of these 7 signs. But if you've been at a company for a while, especially if you're more experienced, even if you've been there, let's say a year or a couple years, and there's a consistent pattern of being questioned all the time and just basically feeling like you can't even get your job done because there's just so much scrutiny on your work, that's a reason that you may need to move on. And the third aspect of this is just a lack of support. If you have asked, hey, you're asking us to work overtime, you're asking us to hit crazy deadlines, maybe you're asking us to use technology we just don't have expertise with, and we don't even have time to learn the new technology. They need to hire new people. They need to bring on more staff. Maybe they need to hire a consulting company. But if you see a pattern of just a total lack of support, a lack of the ability for management to do anything to invest in their own company and listen to you, that's one of the biggest signs that it may be time to move on. Now, the other aspect of toxic work environments that we mostly think of when we say this is just a negative environment. Now, what does that really mean? Well, one of the really obvious aspects of this is a culture that promotes overwork. If you work your job and let's say you work, 8 to 5, 9 to 5, and you sign off Slack or Teams, or if you're in a physical office, you leave around then, and your manager starts to guilt trip you, hey, the other people are leaving early. That's a really unhealthy culture. It's basically a company that's sending signals that what you're rewarded by is the amount of hours that you do. And remember, we do knowledge work, at least if you're in a technology role. We don't do work that's based off the number of hours that we do. One developer can take 1 hour to build something that has the same impact as 20 hours worth of another developer if it's designed properly and they're rested well. So if you work at a company and they sort of celebrate or promote overwork and they push people and reward people even based on working more than is reasonable and not having like a time in the day they can say, I'm done with my work day. I've worked enough. I took this job on the expectation of 40 hours a week. That is an average, usual amount of hours. Then that may be a sign that you should consider leaving. But the other aspect of just really negative culture is when the culture undervalues their employees. If you see other people work really hard or like teach themselves a bunch of new technology, on the job, not even in their spare time, and they just apply themselves and do a good job, and nobody is ever rewarded. Nobody's ever recognized. The management never says the team's really done an amazing job with delivering these features. That's a sign that they're just creating a culture there that is not supportive of the people. Now, I'm not trying to tell you should expect some fairy tale company where, every single time you do something even mildly good, you're going to get rewarded for it. But I've worked at companies before where a team has just busted their ass for a year to get some key release out the door through all this drama and stress. And once it was out, all the management did was complain about why it wasn't done better. They didn't listen to any of the feedback. And so, if you're not getting valued, if you're not getting rewarded, if you're not getting any kind of recognition, that is a sign that it may be time to move on. And the last aspect of working in these toxic environments that's a good sign that it may be time to move on is when your company is just rife with politics. There's a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni that I really love. I read this on a plane once, and it changed my career. And his definition of politics is when people start to tell each other what they want to hear and not the truth. And if you've been at a company where you go into stand-up meetings or planning meetings and you hear people talk and you know they're full of shit, you know that what they're saying isn't the true state of the project. They're saying stuff to try to smooth things over because they think the other people shouldn't hear the truth, or, they aren't capable of understanding the truth. That's become political. And if you're at a company where it's just politics is business as usual, and people are regularly not transparent with each other. You may remember the video I made about a year ago about healthy habits, 7 habits of being a senior developer. I mentioned that basically not revealing that you're refactoring to your management as a way to make sure that there's quality in the product is something that I actually recommend in some situations. But that's not the same as what I'm talking about. I'm talking about where the management, the developers, everybody is really not being open across the board. It's just a systemic problem. If you see that, you're probably in a toxic work environment. The 4th sign, it's probably time to get a new tech job, is if there's just a work-life imbalance. And the first sign that this is probably going on is just unsustainable work hours. If you keep getting on projects or keep working on efforts, and the way the company staffs the effort, the way they set deadlines, the level that they expect you to work is just not sustainable. It's just burning everybody out. That's not something that you should really allow yourself to stay in for very long. If it's not your company, you're not rewarded based on whether the project is successful. Even if you have stock options, you can't guarantee that the company is going to be successful, right? It's the management, your contributions, your peers' contributions, whether the customer responds the way that you want them to. There's all these variables outside of your control. So if you're bending over backwards, sacrificing your own personal health for the company, no offense, you're really being foolish. But the other way you can know that you're probably working in a company where there's a work-life imbalance is if they're just not flexible. We all have lives, and it would be nice to think that everything we need to do in our life, we can neatly fit outside of the hours of a workday. But if you've got children, if you've got a car that needs to be worked on, if you need to attend something that your family needs, we all have times we need to do stuff during the day, during the workday. And, if you're working remotely, sometimes that makes this easier. Not always, depending on the crunch of the project that you're on. But if you consistently try to find just even small pockets of time throughout the week or the month to do stuff during work hours, and then make it up later, but, so that you can move forward in your life and you can do stuff and you can make sure, your obligations are met, and your company is just unsupportive. They even shame you about it or question your commitment about it. That's a really big sign that you've become just basically totally out of balance with work and life, and your company does not understand or have a realistic view of what it's like to hire an employee, and that they need to have a freaking life. The 5th sign that it may be time to leave your current gig is if your compensation is just below industry standard. Now, hey, if you get into the software industry and you don't have a degree, or you get promoted to be an architect and maybe you didn't get a bachelor's or something like that happened to me, will you maybe make a little bit less than industry average, at least at first when you first do that position? Sure. That's a very valid way that some of us move into these positions when we don't have maybe the on paper schooling or experience that we need. And I think we all just kind of accept that to a level. But if you're working at a company and you're qualified for it, whether it's through experience or education, and you've been doing it for a while, and you're looking at what people make in your region or even if you're remote and you're looking at the region that you're doing work for, where they're based in, and they're significantly undercutting your salary based on what you should make, that is not something you should accept. Now, I have accepted, I want to be honest here, I have accepted working at companies for less than I knew I was worth when I had personal challenges, or when I knew, hey, based on the stuff I got going on at home, I can't put as much into work right now as I would normally. But this shouldn't be a long-term strategy for you. If you find you're being underpaid, even I would say for a year or something like that, don't hold on and just buy their promises and hope that things are going to go better. Now, again, if you got a good reason, and maybe, out of all these 7 things, compensation is only one of the issues, and the work environment's really great, and they're valuing their employees, and you're getting to grow, it may be okay to not be compensated as much. Again, that career guide I mentioned at the beginning of the episode of the show, if you haven't checked that out, I talk in a lot more detail about, impact, growth, work-life balance, and rewards. These are the 4 things I'm kind of talking about in this show. But the other thing you got to look out for is a lack of benefits. If you're working for a company and they're not willing to give your family health insurance for reasonable prices, or you really need, let's say, mental health support. Post-COVID, a lot of us are really struggling with mental health. I'm coaching people every week from all over the world, and many people are really struggling, or their families are really struggling. And, mental health services are not always cheap. I think a good company that you want to stay at should realize it's not enough to just give health insurance. You may have to also offer some other benefits that are just typical in the industry. So if you're at a company and they're not paying you well, plus they're not giving you reasonable benefits, plus some of these other things here, again, I'm just trying to get you to take a kind of 360-degree view at your situation and not just bail because you don't like a couple things. But if you do see kind of a combination of these factors, take action. Don't just sit there and suffer. The 6th sign, it may be time to get out, is just a diminished quality of your work. This happens when you're not motivated anymore. You're burned out. You're sick of what you're doing. You've been doing it for so long, you don't really care. That's a good sign. It's time to move on. Now, that's not the fault necessarily of your employer. I've coached some people where they've been at the same company for 10 years. Hello, you're going to get bored. Even if they try to give you new projects, you've been dealing with the same business in the same industry and the same people for 10 years. What are the chances that's still going to be exciting to you? Very slim. It's time to kind of, pull yourself up and get into a new opportunity. But if you start to experience that, the quality of your work goes down. You're writing more bugs than you used to. Management's complaining that sort of the stuff that you're delivering isn't as good as it used to be. Take that as a serious sign. Try not to take it personally or get offended. Take it as a sign that you need to grow. It's probably time to get out. And right along with that, if they're overlooking your contributions, you're doing stuff and you think you're making a big effort, but it seems like nobody else really is paying that much attention or cares. I've experienced this. That can be where you actually think you're doing a good job and you think you're working really hard, but you're not being maybe as honest with yourself as you could be, that you're kind of checked out. You kind of don't care about the gig as much. You're hoping people are rewarding you. You feel like you should get that promotion. Hey, I've been here a long time. But if you really sit and think, okay, what have I really done to get a promotion? I guess not really a lot. I kind of started to dial back on year 3 or something like that. That's a sign it may be time to move on. That's not, again, necessarily your company's fault. It might just be the circumstances. You've overstayed your welcome. It's time to challenge yourself again. And the 7th sign that it might be time to move on from your current gig is if there's just better opportunities somewhere else. If you start getting attractive offers with better perks or better money or better technology and people are reaching out to you, talk to them. I always tell people, if you're currently employed, that's the best time to talk to people about new opportunities, because you already have the job security. If it doesn't work out, if you don't like it, it won't stress you out. You just be like, whatever, I'm not interested. This isn't the right fit for me. And I just am surprised by how many people don't even try pursuing conversations with people when they know they've been stuck. But if you're, not even currently job hunting and a recruiter reaches out to you, or, a director from some company reaches out to you, or something just falls in your lap as a possibility, and you sort of convince yourself, well, I've been at this company for so long. I don't know if it's worth the change. You may have heard the saying, the devil meaning it's better to deal with the devil meaning the crap that you're familiar with every day than the devil you don't know. You might join the company and, oh my gosh, is it worse than the company I'm at? And while that's a possibility, it's not a reason to stay where you are, because otherwise you're just going to stay where you are forever. And if, these 7 signs I've given you today, you see, let's say, 5 of these or 4 of these, or God forbid, 7 of these are checking the boxes for you, you need to move on, regardless of whether you're scared that the future may be harder or not. Otherwise, you're just letting yourself stagnate. You're letting your career basically die and come to a halt. And unfortunately, if you do that to yourself, even though the company may be messed up, you may be being micromanaged, you're the one to blame. And also, the industry changes. If the industry is changing, the technology is changing, the management approaches are changing, let's say the market that your customers' products, or the market, that your company's products are offered in, that whole market is changing, and you look at your company and you go, they're not doing anything about this. They're ignoring industry trends. Now, you got to be a little bit careful, because, it's easy for us to be like armchair product managers, right? Where we kind of sit back and go, yeah, I know how to do that. And we basically feel like we could do a better job than, our product manager, our QA manager, our director. Have a little humility. But if you see obvious trends in the industry and your company could really benefit, tangibly, financially from starting to utilize those things, and they're just continually not doing anything to harness those new capabilities, that may be a sign that it's really valid for you to move on, because really it's kind of foolish for you to stay at a company that's ignoring where things are headed. So how many of these signs do you see in your current job? Are you going to stay? Are you going to go? Why or why not? Leave me some comments. Until next time, thanks.